The Sleepers, Chapter 46, Family Ties. Jane was absent when I awoke from Ray's sleep. I knew they'd celebrated some dumb anniversary or something last night, but she had a mission. Maybe she was still catching up on classwork. Soon we would launch the next phase, having given Ray enough time to flounder directionless with his new vision. Jane was critical to this next step, and had volunteered to lead the charge. We were so close. Her news would leave us just a dream or two from success. Where was she? I expected her entrance with familiar grace and cocky smile, her tell for some great accomplishment. So I opened the door ready to receive her when I heard the keys. Instead, Jane barged in with fire in her face, slamming a finger in my chest. "You never told me." "What?" "You never said that you and Ray are cousins." This was trouble. I figured you knew. Everybody knows Sleep's history. "Oh, everybody? That's mere justification, and you know it," she snapped back. Backing up slowly from her fury, I decided it was best to stay silent. "And I already scanned my history book," she continued. "No mention of the relationship. Why did you never tell me?" "So he told you then?" I guessed. "Yeah, he told me, and I nearly hit him over the head in surprise. Instead, I just barely managed to swallow my surprise and bury my anger at you for this inadvertent omission." I reached for her slowly, cautiously, hoping to move her away from the still open door and the listening public, but she pushed me away. "Would you have refused involvement if you knew?" I asked. "I don't know. Guess we'll never know. But you should have told me, regardless. It should have been on the list of things to tell Jane." Sarcasm flowed with anger. It was time for me to intercede with soothing, albeit harsh, explanation. I slipped around her to close the door and then backed further away, hoping she'd follow. "Our grandfathers were brothers, making us second cousins. A meaningless relationship in my book. There is no family tie in this work. It is dead. Ray and I are as different as night and day." "Even night and day exchange pleasantries twice daily," retorted Jane, still venting while twisting my simile. I saw no way of luring her to the couch, where I could calm her with the usual embrace. I chose flowery words and grand hand gestures as next best alternative. "Then we are like the setting of the vicious sun, defiant against the night, angry that it must sleep while night works its wicked ways. We are as a tumultuous sunset, when the sun thrashes with brilliant fiery rebellion, bleeding embers of light till only darkest night triumphs. That is the history of our blood, the sole genetic memory. That is the essence between Ray and me. If ever we were one blood, it was when God placed the lights in the heavens. It is time to remind this brother whom the lesser light obeys." "Poetic words won't free you from explanation, John. You needed to tell me. That is such a flagrant omission, it might as well have been a lie. History is too old to know of your current feud, but why no mention in the history books?" "When you create the greatest invention of the 21st century, you have a certain power to control information." "The answer, John." Her stare could wilt flowers and vanquish legions. I slumped into the armchair, having given up on needing a spot for two. "Fine. You have to dig deeper. The focus of most articles is on the outcome. Scholarly sleep articles, the boring ones, cite brotherhood as a reason for Desmond's first failing to detect the danger of mismatched sleeping. They would, of course, be compatible, but I'm doubting you read those journals. We don't broadcast our connection, and we never will. You think Rockefeller or Jobs glorified their accomplices?" "You would at least share the same last name?" Her sharpness ignored my rhetorical question, and she refused to sit down. "Our grandfathers were half-brothers, as polar opposites as their bio-fathers. They were raised together faithfully by my great-grandmother. Despite her perseverance, she couldn't erase their inherited nature. Only sleep was so powerful." Between her folded arms and grinding teeth, Jane's behavior made a porcupine look inviting. "Let me elaborate, with some bias from my grandfather. God blessed Ray's family tree. Desmond studied medicine and psychology. He excelled in every subject. but he loved exploring sleep. He and his brother joked Desmond would rule the world if only he could stop sleeping. This joke led to his postulates on sleep substitution during his postdoc studies, but he needed a guinea pig. "Your grandfather, John Sr.?" interrupted Jane. "Maybe I have heard this story." "Not told like this. My grandfather was desperate for work. The American economy had been in shambles for years between COVID and the Chinese debt crisis. There was no room for cash-poor, unlucky entrepreneurs. His failures left him at the mercy of the rich. He was the prime candidate for Desmond's work and could be trusted to keep the progress quiet. If loose lips sink ships, patent theft is the Pearl Harbor of academia. So, John Sr. slept while Desmond studied, tested, and perfected. But when not sleeping, John dedicated every hour to molding the family business plan." She gave me a knowing look of guilt. "Sounds like being a workaholic runs in the blood." "Come on over here and let me finish the story. You can't be mad much longer." "How about you just finish and let me decide about being mad?" "Okay, fine," I agreed, lowering my hands from an inviting wave to my seat. Anyway, countless business failures taught John Sr. what would not work. Together they developed the flawless plan. The business juggernaut would launch when tests proved positive. Patents, hardware manufacturing, venture capitalists, marketing, and so on. Like a constitution awaiting revolution, Sleep Free's architecture waited for the solution. But Desmond had no obligation to his brother. He worked the patents and the incorporation in his favor. After all, it was his baby. Once on the ground making money, Desmond retained my grandfather as his sleeper and as his advisor. Lucrative positions complete with enough stock options to retire quite happily. John Sr. served as the highest-ranking board member below chairman till his death. But our greatest legacy, our birthright, is that of sleeper. By design or happenstance, our grandfathers timed their children's birth, a pattern repeated in the case of Ray and me. I was predetermined to wear these chains and encouraged to pass them on. I stopped finally long enough for Jane to reorganize her thoughts and continue her investigation, all while pacing. "But why keep sleeping? Your family could have been free from the beginning. The testing worked. Desmond found the solution. Everyone got rich." Rudeness eroded my own patience. She never resisted my charm this long. "For a sleep teacher, you sure missed the big picture. You've clearly never slept for someone." "Don't antagonize me, John. You wouldn't like to see me really mad. You chose to ignore the family connection. Now you have to come clean." "Fine. Do you think all sleepers hate their jobs?" I asked. "Do you think everyone's like me? They don't remember life without sleeping. Sleep is more than a job. Sleep is more than steady income. It's life's great elixir. Sleep Free rewards laziness and establishes permanency. It solves the impoverished dilemma: employment without labor. What a brainless proposition. If you're lucky, you may even sleep for someone great. You can live a very tempting, vicarious life and never have a valuable thought or action of your own." Jane shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe it. It's despicable." "You know all this from your students' parents. This is America. This is what we are fighting." At last, she started to approach me, sensing empathy in our cause. "I know, but it doesn't make it easier." When she was close enough to snare, I grabbed her waist and brought her in to share the chair. Her fire was extinguished, replaced with that nagging need to fix the system. We could have sold our stock and retired. Instead, we sycophantically submitted for 3 generations. Because it's addictive for sleepers too. John Sr. dreamed the company's vision. Desmond lived it. I know my grandfather recognized the dangers of the sleep system, how it changes people, takes away the ability to live your own dreams. But he was too immersed in the money and the position, and simply too grumpy to do anything about it. Certainly my father, a coward against the system, knows the predicament of the human race. Hence he begs so earnestly for forgiveness. Deep down, I think he bides his time, keeping his enemies close. knowing that perhaps his posterity could succeed where he only dreamed.
"Your father is smarter and more driven than you think," interrupted Jane. "He may be tired, but I think he knows exactly what he's doing."
I pushed her away slightly. "Don't support that man," Jane replied calmly.
"His eyes speak volumes. They are troubled and deep, but perceiving. He has contemplated all outcomes and groomed you for success. Perhaps the prayers you ridicule are prayers for you."
I will not let this victory, my victory, our victory, be my father's. He surrendered to the song of sleep. I will die fighting, awake. Satisfied with my honesty and accepting the short outburst, she resumed the interrogation more playfully.
"None of this answers the real question. Why did you never tell me?"
But that story is my answer. My family let me down. My ancestors failed. I don't need to remember some ancient blood connection and weaken my resolve, or yours. I am on this path, and Ray is the avenue. We may be cousins or strangers. It doesn't matter. Soon enough, nothing will matter. She relaxed fully into my arms at last. This was her traditional resignation and sign of peace. Once there, she spilled what I most desired to know.
"We had our special dinner last night."
"And?" I prodded.
"I got him talking about nightmares and told him my story. He jumped on it immediately, even more excited than you. Of course, you hadn't told me everything at that point."
"Well, what did you say? How did it go?" Jane was an adept liar, a compliment she did not appreciate, but she played Ray perfectly. Nestled in my arms, our safe haven, she then described how she hooked him with praise about helping sleeper children, then baited him with romanticized stories about nightmares waking her up. The idea entranced Ray as he tackled proverbially throwing the baby out with the bathwater and creating a solution worse than the problem. I couldn't wait any longer for the punchline. "And?"
"It worked just fine, Antsy Pants. As he put it, perhaps you all might learn something from studying what causes nightmares and find a potential connection to your drugs, without the nasty side effects, though."
She had done it. "That's perfect! He will come to me, and I will lead him to Cumulus. You did even better than I imagined." I kissed her out of pure excitement. She pulled back with a mock angry scowl, apparently not having forgotten her original fire.
"Did you ever doubt me?"
I kissed her again and answered, "Never."
"Ray brought you up again, by the way. He plans to task you with the nightmare studies. It was then I learned about your connection. He decided to tell me all about you, his antisocial best friend cousin. Since he's convinced, try as he might, we will never meet. Ball's back in your court."
Chapter 47. Recruitment.
When Jane's principal learned about the final interview, particularly the absurd promised donation, she all but drove Jane downtown and marched her into the tower herself. Anything to keep Jane from backing out of this opportunity. But once Jane had returned the call, there was no need for the principal's persistence. This schoolteacher was not the type to back out. Jane stepped off the train at Sleep Station, the central downtown depot. Sleep Free rechristened the train station their own, replacing a name now lost in history. The station was mostly empty at this mid-morning hour, which only made it sparkle more. How anyone kept a metro stop so clean was baffling, but this company spared no expense. She took the escalator up to the glass-domed atrium and felt immediately out of place, like she was playing dress-up, a sleeper teacher in scrubs obviously trying to belong in a foreign world. Though not crowded at this hour, everyone bustled in business suits, scurried for their coffees, or met over their data pads at the food court, dining on what must be brunch or late breakfast. Maybe these clients didn't follow normal eating hours. No one stared at her, but Jane felt eyes everywhere. This was their world. Leaving the glass edifice, she entered the twilight courtyard, the impressive concrete runway welcoming commuters with abstract artwork and fountains. 3 towers at the end of the walk grabbed her attention. bright beacons of light colors that stood stark contrast against the rest of downtown's blues and browns. They were the heart of the city. New businesses sprung up around them, living off them. Everyone lived off this heart, or maybe that was backwards. Sleep Free lived off our hearts like a cancer. She wouldn't be sucked in by their power. Long ago, Jane had visited these towers. Those memories were fairly well repressed, but she knew they existed deep down. It was the odd art she remembered most, causing the memory to bubble up from the depths. Totally convinced of their cause, her parents brought her to the Twilight courtyard for a protest. They'd held her in the air and screamed to passers-by and camera crews, "You want to enslave this child? Dream for yourself! End Sleep Free!" She could see the artwork so well held high in her dad's arms. Mom and Dad had been locked up on grounds of trespassing that night. Just overnight that time. Sleep Free had of course purchased the entire city block, and all blocks adjacent to the towers, to control would-be threats. After this last lockup, her parents finally gave up, left the city, and moved away to a quieter place. Now she was back, entering the monster's lair. Everything around her was different than her school and her present community. The contrast was ridiculous. Jane had given a lesson once on segregation, perhaps her most contentious last year. The kids were shocked to learn about segregation and Jim Crow laws. The concept was so horrible. Some ignorant students and parents tried to cancel the Reconstruction lessons after the first day. Thought they were too traumatizing and horrific. History class wasn't meant to be a walk in the park. It was supposed to help us avoid repetition. Yet in the last 50 years, we had embraced segregation without protest. That's what she tried to teach before the principal finally begged her, the principal didn't want her to resign, to simmer down. Segregation baffled her students. How could Jim Crow defeat justice in the dawn of emancipation? How could another 100 years pass before the Civil Rights Movement? And another 100 before people stopped seeing each other by the color of their skin? It was all so foreign to her students, but they lived it every day, thanks to Sleep Free. Yes, today lacked the violence, open racism, and white retrenchment, but otherwise this place looked very segregated. It is what disparate groups do, even without force. Just look how out of place she felt in Twilight. Blue-collar communities had become sleeper communities. The city ghettos had become sleep centers. School boards like her own ended cross-district busing and established all sleeper schools to cater to the sleepers' paltry time. Client schools sprung up in droves to take advantage of additional study time. They shrouded their selectivity behind coy names like challenge, special, talented, preparatory, etc. But everyone knew their purpose. Businesses boomed in the client districts: 24-hour entertainment, nocturnal fine dining, 24-hour gyms, and all-night nannies. For the very few all-client churches, 2 a.m. weekly service became the norm, leaving daylight for secular activities. Consequently, this city, and countless like it, conveniently divided. Her parents were ignored or jailed when they fought the change. Without purpose and planning, Jim Crow had again beset America. Maybe it had happened prior to Sleep Free between rich and poor, but Jane liked to believe America was better than that. And worst of all, unlike the festering resentment in the Old South, a feeling which fomented protest, America today happily swallowed segregation with complacency. Both sides had what they needed. Both glutted on work and play, sleep and life. They were addicted, with no need for change. Now she stood at the crossroads, ready to face the giant where her parents had failed. She would march into that office and give him a piece of her mind. The interview was held in an office on the second floor from the top, center tower. An escort moved her through security, the elevator, and into the interview. Jane could just make out dots for the strange artwork in the courtyard down below. She came to the meeting with such resolve. How had she not failed the phone screenings? How did they find her? Her opinions were not exactly private these days. The interviewer, a man named John, introduced himself with his fancy title. He talked about the award and her qualifications. All seemed normal. Then he weirdly segued into a series of odd questions.
Jane, how do you really feel about borrowed sleep and sleep-free?
The casual question caught her off guard and took some time to respond. She was prepared to discuss her teaching methods, education, and students, but not her feelings, at least not with respect to the wretched sleep-free. The face of her principal, desperate for the donation, loomed in her mind. I guess it's fine, she shrugged, not knowing how to answer this question and not sure whether she should be honest. She didn't really want this.
Don't try to guess what I want to hear. You have no idea what I want to hear, and so any effort is not worth the time.
What a strange thing to say. The odd man leaned forward, intent on Jane.
I want to know how you feel. Simple. Speak your mind. This will have no bearing on the award. I just want to know.
With that reassurance, her nerves settled and she opened up. A little. In that case, I really don't like it, sir. He encouraged her like a skilled therapist.
Tell me more.
What harm can happen now? I might lose the award if he's lying, which would be no loss to my ego, though the principal will kill me. And if he does speak the truth, I'm going to have an interesting story to tell. Fine, I'll tell you. I hate the sleeping system, and no award or bribe will change my mind. Everything about sleep-free is unnatural and destructive. I like my own dreams and don't want to share them with others. I certainly don't want someone else's dreams and sleep. I hate what sleep has done to our society, driving a wedge into every corner of our culture. And I really hate what has happened to our children. Clients develop a complex from a very young age, before they are mature enough to have an employee. And sleepers, like my students, lose everything. Childhood, opportunity, hope, everything. She really should have cut herself off halfway through that rant. But the more she vented, the more he smiled. She was done for sure. That smile had to be his way of laughing. Like, look at this small-town girl and her backward ways. No way am I getting this award. She adjusted in her seat, prepared to leave his office, rethinking if she should have been so honest, and apologizing mentally to her students for missing out on the donation. But his questions continued, and he motioned her to stay. She answered strange question after strange question until at last he asked,
What would you be willing to do to stop it?
Frustrated, she blurted out pure honesty. I think I'm doing all I can right now by teaching. He cocked his head.
But how far would you be willing to go if you could actually end it? Not just stop it in the lives of a few sleepers. I want to know exactly what you would do. Don't be afraid. Speak your mind.
These questions are ridiculous. This was not an interview for a teaching award. Something was very wrong. What is it you want from me? She finally demanded, but then opened her big mouth and continued before he could answer. If I actually believed I could change the system, and I mean change it on a national level, I would be willing to do a lot of things. I have never thought about it because it's not a possibility. I really hate what sleep has done to us. We've lost everything as a people that matters, and it would take someone like yourself to really undo this, if that's even possible.
You are right, Jane. It would take someone like me, and someone like you.
She could not control the contortion of confusion that immediately engrossed on her face. Me?
Yes, Jane, and I have an offer for you. You are getting the award, no question. But are you willing to do whatever it takes to change the sleeper system? Take your time before I speak more.
This whole conversation was a string of surprises and required a surprise of her own. Yes, I think so. But I don't see how I can help compared to your position of authority. This seems more like a trick. He answered calmly.
No trick. Sometimes the closer we are to the problem, the more difficult it is to solve it.
though you may not believe me, especially given our view," at which point he motioned out the window.
"I want to destroy the system, but I can't do it alone. A certain young scientist within our organization is seeking the end of sleep-free. His name is John. I want you to help him."
What? What? In retrospect, Jane would realize her shocked looks and total jaw drops were a little embarrassing. But how was she to act given such a sinister proposal? Recovering from the overload of surprise, they traded questions and answers for an hour about who was John, what was she to do, how would she meet him, why would he fall for her, how would she report, why they were both named John, etc. Being always prepared, the puppet master had a plan for every detail. Before leaving, Jane asked one last pressing question. Why me? The answer gave all the motivation she would need to start living the lie.
"Jane, I have searched everywhere for the right person for a very long time. We have infinite analytical power at our fingertips. I just changed the parameters on the search for an award candidate and found you. There have been previous recipients, but no one matched quite right until you popped up."
Jane interjected. "I knew my kids' scores were not enough to receive this award or get called into this office."
"Oh, you would be surprised. I programmed everything possible to find the perfect match for my son in this mission. He has a soft spot for compassionate teachers. He had a few bad experiences growing up. He needs someone independent and willing to take charge. The right woman has to be smart. He wouldn't waste his time otherwise. And very passionate against sleep-free. And if we're going to trick the heart, I needed someone blatantly beautiful to attract the eye." She blushed at this inappropriate praise, keenly aware of her own charm when not so shocked, and asked, "But how could you tell all that out of data?" "Your whole life is searchable with enough resources, Jane. Your parents were MDs.
"They most certainly were not."
"And judging by your fake shock," he explained calmly, "you hide it so you can hold a job. Your web profile makes it pretty clear that you live for your dreams. You have no registered account as either a sleeper or a client with Sleep-Free. You have never even tasted borrowed sleep at a quick clinic. Your student test scores were impressive and your teaching ratings high, with just the right level of complaints from parents wishing you would keep your mouth shut a little bit more. The segregation lesson seems to have raised quite a stir. All these things and more told me you were the exact right person I had been chasing for years. You failed the phone interview, but I'd expected as much, and programmed my search to ignore your screening, bringing your name directly to me."
Impressive, but it felt like that moment when you lost the magic of Sherlock's deductive skills, having learned his tricks. Jane sunk down, completely overwhelmed at the responsibility, and asked to at last excuse herself from his office. He repeated the instructions on how to meet John at the gala, and told her they would be in touch soon. One thought ran through her mind on replay. What the hell have I gotten myself into?